2 years ago. My mother is still with us, and I asked them, "Were you elated? Were you, full of joy that we have an independent state?" And they said, "At the time, we didn't know if we would live 2 weeks from now. We had no sense of whether this would survive under the assault. This new nation would survive under the assault of neighboring Arab countries." And they've lost so many friends. My mother said she counts on Memorial Day, which was the day before. We passed from mourning to joy overnight, and she counts more than 30 people from her social circle as she grew up as a girl who fell in the War of Independence or later. So this is a very meaningful, a very poignant Independence Day, and it is difficult, of course, to celebrate in the confines of your homes. But still, I think we have a different way of testing our solidarity now. And Israeli society, I think overall, with the usual tensions and complications and let's say certain segments of society responding in different ways. But overall, I think Israeli society has faced the Corona crisis with a remarkable degree of resilience, determination, discipline. And I think, if I may say so, that we must be doing something right, because while we have a fairly large number of cases, we have a very low lethality rate. We must be doing something right if our lethality rate per case is 1/3 that of Germany and 1/10 that of Spain or Italy or Britain. So, of course, there is also a reason why Israeli longevity generally is among the 5 highest in the world. And, my wife's a nurse. My daughter is about to start practicing as a doctor. Her husband is a doctor. I know about everything that's wrong with the Israeli health system, the inadequate numbers of doctors and nurses, the inadequate numbers of hospital beds, the lack of proper investment in infrastructure. But at the same time, we have very, very high quality personnel. Yesterday, the lighting of the torches, which marks the transition to Independence Day, we had one professor from Sheba Hospital, 2 nurses, volunteers who work in hospitals and who work in Magen David Adom, our equivalent of the Red Cross. The quality of people makes a difference, and the quality of science makes a difference. And so we must be doing something right in this respect. I don't know how the country will be affected by the gradual loosening of limitations. Right now, we are in a lockdown for Independence Day in order to prevent the crowding of people in the parks and so on, which is typical to this day. But as of tomorrow, we will be going again into the gradual mode of releasing the economy from its restrictions. We shall see, of course, how this works. But if 2 months ago, in early March, there was talk about thousands of dead and the overload on the existing ventilators, we now have less than 100 people on machines in Israel. So we must have done something right in all the difficulty and confusion and amidst a very severe and unpleasant political crisis. I think when we look back on this years from now, I think we can look back on this as another challenge that we have been able to meet effectively. So that's one set of observations about our current situation. We are also working fairly closely with our Palestinian neighbors, the Palestinian Authority. Of course, we did take some steps when we found out that very senior people there, including Steyer, Prime Minister, were going around saying that Israel is deliberately causing Palestinians to get the pandemic. I mean, that is crazy stuff, and it's part of the internal political posturing in the Palestinian Authority. Abbas is not young anymore, and people are maneuvering to take his place, and the way to do it is by being ultra anti-Zionist, as is typical of the Palestinian story. It's sad, it's frustrating, but we nevertheless still have to work with their medical authorities and with their security forces, because it's in our interest and our mutual interest to do so. Even with Gaza, we have found some kind of sort of modus vivendi, and there is some talk now, which the Prime Minister and his political partner now, Benny Gantz, who was his rival at the election, is now going to be his partner in government, is currently the Speaker of the Knesset. And he said, also mentioned this, that we may have a deal with Hamas in the next few weeks or so, that would bring back the bodies of our 2 soldiers, which they hold, and the 2 deranged individuals who crossed into Gaza, which they are holding as hostages. And we would do certain things in return, hopefully, presumably nothing that would put our security in danger, but we need to take perhaps advantage of their need in order to go into a longer range, what they call in Israel regularization, hasdara, to those of you who know a bit of Hebrew, not a peace agreement, not a solution, but a sort of conflict management mode with both our Palestinian neighbors, because these are 2 separate entities and they will remain separate entities for the foreseeable future. But we need to do conflict management effectively. We all look forward to see whether the implementation of parts of the Trump plan would make it easier or more difficult to go on this conflict management mode. I would offer the guess that it would actually be beneficial, but I know that I have many Israeli friends who think otherwise. But in any case, we need to be sober. We have a lot of knowledge by now and a lot of experience about how to do conflict management with the 2 Palestinian governments, the one in Ramallah, the one in Gaza, and with their forces on the ground. We have also enough experience to know that the prospects of conflict resolution, of a breakthrough towards the permanent status agreement with the Palestinians, the prospects are quite limited, if only because they are totally divided and their political leadership in Ramallah is very weak, has serious legitimacy problems. You know that Abbas now is serving the 13th year of a 4-year term. So when that is the situation, and all these legitimacy problems and governance problems and political problems and old age and all this is burdening the capacity to take decisions, we cannot expect very brave and audacious steps from the other side that would make it possible to cut an effective peace deal. So we are being realistic, looking towards down the road. But meanwhile, we actually find in the present crisis elements that can help us manage the conflict. But meanwhile, and these are my main points, we need to keep our eyes open to the possibility of escalation, at least on one front, and to some extent, perhaps also in another. The main issue remains Iran, Iran's ambitions, Iran's nuclear project, which is rolling forward because they've peeled off and emptied the JCPOA of any real meaning. And so they are on their way to having enough fissile material for a bomb. And of course, once they get close, and that could happen by our assessment, the JISS, we wrote this in our December predictions for 2020. And also afterwards, we read what the leaks from the IDF, from the Directorate of Military Intelligence assessments, which I used to be the guy who wrote these papers, and now I'm reading them. The assessment is also that by 2021, we may face a moment of decision. And regardless of what happens in the American elections, the Iranians are going ahead, and we may sail into very dangerous waters. Moreover, Iran is in a terrible crisis. The corona has taken thousands of lives, including people at high places in the leadership. It also showed the leadership to be unreliable in terms of their response. So a lot of people in Iran have lost their confidence, their faith in the regime, which, you know, many of them never had any faith in that regime anyway. Moreover, the sanctions have already brought the Iranian economy to a very low point. And now you have this almost unbelievable situation in the oil market. I don't know if you saw the reports about people paying money for others to take their oil from them because there was a glut in the American reserves, oil reserves, and there was nowhere to put that oil. So people were willing to, the price of oil in certain spots became a negative price. That's almost beyond comprehension. But it is a combination of things that the Saudis and the Russians did to push each other out of the market. It's also the result, of course, of the very dramatic drop in consumption, which I hope, by the way, for the future of our planet, that it will not pick up back to where it was once the crisis is over. So consumption in China, consumption in the Western world may go down significantly, and hopefully that would really make a difference. So what it means is that Iran has lost its main income, both in terms of income tax and certainly its entire income in foreign currency is essentially wiped out, which puts the Iranian regime in a very dangerous situation. Because for years they've based their rule on the subsidies they pour on the Iranian poor, on the weaker elements of Iranian society. Now they could find themselves in a profound political and social crisis, and therefore there are two possibilities. They may come to the table, and if it was up to Rouhani and Zarif, maybe they would have come to the table. But we have to be very sober. Iran is not controlled by its president, and its foreign policy is not made by its foreign minister. Iranian control of Iran and of Iranian policy is in the hands of one man, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, the unelected supreme leader of Iran, and people around him who are mainly coming from the ranks of the IRGC. We just saw the IRGC blatantly test an essentially a satellite launching missile, which means it's an intercontinental ballistic missile that could be used to for the delivery of nuclear weapons, practically much larger ranges than the 2,000 kilometers that were supposedly agreed. So they are playing with fire by doing this, by challenging the Americans in the waters of the Gulf. And Trump has tweeted in a rather silly way that, you know, shoot down the Iranian boats. Well, that's a funny term to use, but the Iranians responded, or General Salehi of the IRGC responded by saying that they will challenge the American Navy. They will go after American ships, naval ships, if that happens. Now, this man must really remember that when the Iran provoked the Americans more than 30 years ago, the last stages of the Iran-Iraq war, there was a situation where the Americans were reflagging, that's to say, putting American flags on shipping in the Gulf. And when the Iranians attacked, the Americans eliminated overnight the Iranian Navy in its entirety. So either they're willingly ignoring their history, or they're ignorant of their own history, or they're just trying to play the bravado of heroes. But these games are becoming very dangerous, and we are sailing into very choppy waters. And the Iranians need a direct confrontation right now, because in Lebanon, there is a strong wave of protest against the government and against Hezbollah. In Iraq, there has been a subtle shift in the balance of power away from the pro-Iranian elements. The most radical anti-Iranian candidate was rejected as prime minister, Zofi, but Kazemi, who is now prime minister, is a former head of intelligence, and he's no friend of Iran either. So, and in the Yemeni war, there is a ceasefire that was created by the corona crisis. So the Iranians are losing some of their levers, some of their means of pressure across the region. So they face the Americans, they are confronting the Americans face to face in the Gulf, which makes the situation that we're going into quite dramatic, quite dangerous. And we, of course, have to keep our own eyes on the Iranian presence in Syria, on the supplies they push into Hezbollah's hands, on their attempts to penetrate the Palestinian arena. All of these are very important elements of our security right now. And one more point before I go off to Q&A. I assume that you are aware of what's happening in Libya. I'm saying I assume you are, because for the first time in my living memory, there is something happening which can be described as a European military operation. Not an American military operations, the Europeans may be, some Europeans may be joining, but an operation launched by European nations under European defense arrangements, Operation Irene, which is currently trying to deny the Turks the ability to provide weapons to the GNA government, the Government of National Accord. Of course, the moment you hear a name like Government of National Accord, you know there is discord. And the Government of National Accord in Tripoli rules Tripoli, not Libya, but it is supported by some militias in the area, like the Misratawis, and the Muslim Brotherhood elements in Libya, others, and it is actively supported by weapons and men, certainly Syrian Islamist fighters, but also Turkish regular that have been brought there by Erdogan, because Erdogan is trying to take over the Eastern Mediterranean through an alliance with Fayez Sarraj's government, the GNA government, and the claim that is based on the agreement that he drew with Fayez Sarraj in Ankara late in November, to that Libya and Turkey have an EEZ border in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is not something that's happening on some other planet. This means that Israel, Egypt, Cyprus cannot have access to European markets without Turkish permission, if you accept this absurd map that was drawn by the Turks. Now, I know firsthand that the Greeks are negotiating with Italy and Egypt in order to present to Europe and to the international community an alternative map, one which would actually recognize that the island of Crete actually exists. And the island of Crete is part of Greece and has its own waters. Forgive me for a moment. and it has its own waters, and therefore it has to actually create contiguity between the Greek EEZ and the Egyptian EEZ, not the Libyan and the Turkish. Now, all of these may sound like games that lawyers are playing on the map of the Mediterranean, but these could mean very important elements for Israel and her newly established, well, allies, or I would say more precisely partners. This is not a formal alliance, but it is an alignment of forces. It has emerged in recent years and is embodied in an institution which many people are not aware of, called the EMGF, the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. But it's not just gas, it is a forum for regional cooperation that involves 3 European countries, members of the EU, Italy, Greece, and Cyprus, as well as our 2 peace partners, Egypt and Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian Authority. Now, there are not that many organizations in which Israel, regional organizations in which Israel is not only a legitimate, but a predominant player. But here we are, the Egyptians are hosting the meetings. They are being held in Cairo every 6 months. Last year in the summer, the meeting was attended by US Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry. The whole thing enjoys the support of the EU and of Brussels, and officials have been participating in all the EMGF meetings. In addition, we have a trilateral relationship built to a very high degree between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. This is all very new and very different from anything we've experienced in our past. We used to think of ourselves as an isolated island. Here we are now in partnership with our 2 Arab peace partners and with our 2 Hellenic neighbors in the Eastern Mediterranean. There have been already 7 tripartite summit meetings, 6 of them between Netanyahu, Anastasiades, and Tsipras. Now, Tsipras, the most far left leader in Europe, I mean, I don't know what would have happened. Forgive me if I say so, God forbid, if Corbyn had won the elections, but he didn't. And Tsipras also lost the last election in Greece. But Tsipras, who was the most radical left-winger in the European galaxy, was also a very effective and eager partner in this tripartite alliance. And now, of course, with Mitsotakis, it's probably going even to a higher level. So all of this means that Israel now looks at the Eastern Mediterranean in a very different way than we did 2 years, 5 years ago. And what happens around the Libyan conflict is, all, in a certain sense, is our war as well. We're not going to intervene. That will not help the people we would like to see successful in the Libyan situation. Not that I'm a great admirer of Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Scipio Africanus, he is not. But at the same, having said so, given the audacity, the sheer, you know the word, chutzpah, the sheer cheek of the Turkish-Libyan redrawing of the map of the Eastern Mediterranean, then the political outcome in Libya is by now of great importance to us and to Europe. And we see a situation where the French Navy stops Turkish ships on the high seas. This is a drama. Last time we stopped the Turkish ship on its way to Gaza 10 years ago, we had a full-scale drama on our hands. So in between the Iranian situation, the complexity of the Palestinian question following the Trump plan, and the complications of the Eastern Mediterranean situation, we have quite a lot on our hands once we have a government, which hopefully soon would be put together and get to work. So questions. I saw already a question.